Hi everyone, my name is Desiree and my oral presentation will be on the topic of domestic violence. So domestic violence is also known as intimate partner violence, and it can consist of one partner physically, sexually, and or psychologically abusing the other. It can also be, the term can be used when one partner controls the finances in an effort to harm or, control the other. When children witness domestic violence, it is considered a form of neglect, and it can have a huge impact on both their health and their development later in life. So, who is affected? Domestic violence actually crosses all geographic and socioeconomic areas, but most studies indicate that lower income women in rural communities experience higher rates of violence and sexual abuse. So, it does affect everyone. It's a huge problem. It does not discriminate. However, there are studies that show more vulnerable populations. So, one of these also is lower education levels correlate with more likely domestic violence. Childhood abuse is commonly associated with becoming a perpetrator of domestic violence. It's kind of a cycle that can happen because if you witness domestic violence as a child, you see that as a way to handle your problems as an adult, like an acceptable method of how to handle things. So it is a cycle, and drug and alcohol abuse greatly increases the incidence of domestic violence as well. More than 1 in 3 women and at least 1 in 4 men have been victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. It is also believed that the number for men is greatly underreported. And in the United States, intimate partner homicides make up between 40 and 50% of all murders of women, which I thought was a huge, huge number. The history of domestic violence. So I found a timeline that was created by the University of Pittsburgh in correlation with the Pennsylvania Child Welfare Resource Center. So we're going to go through a timeline of all of the, not all of, but a synopsis of the issues and how domestic violence first came to be, as well as different legislature that has passed since then. So in the 1500s, early settlers in America based their laws on the Old English common law that explicitly permits wife beating for correctional purposes. So husbands were allowed to discipline their wives by beating them. It wasn't until 1866 that the American Society for Prevention and Cruelty to Animals was founded. So the SPCA for animals was created before anything was created to protect children and women from facing cruelty. In 1871, Alabama was the first state to repeal the legal right of men to beat their wives. So this was a step in the right direction, obviously. And then 1882, Maryland is the first state to pass a law that makes wife beating a crime, which back then was punishable by 40 lashes with a whip or a year in jail. 1886, North Carolina declared that a criminal indictment could not be brought against a husband unless the battery was so great as to result in permanent injury, in danger to life, or is malicious beyond all reasonable bounds. So basically, this was kind of a step backwards. North Carolina said that even though domestic violence is a crime, it couldn't be, I guess, convicted unless it was so terrible that the woman had, permanent damage from it. In the 1900s, in 1911, the first family court was created in New York, which was a step in the right direction for the social work field. 1919, women were allowed to vote for the first time. And in the 50s and 60s, the feminist movement began. This also had to do with all of the other movements that were going on at this time. So everybody kind of picked up speed and momentum at once and just kind of brought awareness to a bunch of different issues all at once. So in 1966, Beating is considered cruel and inhumane treatment and becomes grounds for divorce in New York, but the plaintiff or the victim must establish that a sufficient number of beatings have taken place. So, again, this is kind of a step in the right direction, but also a step backwards because there's no. I'm assuming it would be hard to prove that a sufficient number of beatings have taken place if you're a victim in that courtroom. In 1967, Maine opened one of the first shelters in the US for domestic violence victims. The 70s and 80s, a lot was happening. In the 70s, the women were coming together. Like I said, there was a lot of different movements going on. So African Americans were trying to get equal rights as well. So women kind of came together with the African Americans seeking equal rights, and then the battered women's movement was born. In 71, Women in Transition formed in Philadelphia, and their mission was to provide services to divorced and separated women, battered wives, and single mothers, because many battered women at this time were being denied welfare because of their husband's salaries. Back then, it was harder to get a divorce than it was now. So even if you were separated but you were still legally married on paper, they would consider your husband's income and you would be denied benefits. In 1975, most of the U.S. states allow wives to bring criminal action against a husband who inflicts injury upon her. That's good. In 1976, Pennsylvania, an Old Town ordinance is still on the books that no husband shall beat his wife after 10 at night or on Sundays. So I added this in here just to kind of show that even though we are in the 1900s at this point, there's still old laws on the books that could technically be withheld or upheld. In 1981, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence began holding regional retreats and statewide meetings in order to build support. They involved more women and strengthened the support of coalition activities. In 88, the Victims of Crime Act is amended to make awards available for the first time to the victims of domestic violence. So this is kind of like funding for victims, like victims' compensation almost. And in 1989, the U.S. has 1,200 battered women's programs, which shelter 300,000 women and children per year. So for that time, that was a really good number. Obviously, our population has gone up, so the number of programs and shelters should have also gone up. And in the 90s, 1990, stalking is first identified as a crime. Stalking is considered a form of domestic violence. And also in 1990, for the first time, judges are required to consider any history of spousal abuse before determining child custody or visitation. So this kind of plays into the child welfare and children who witness domestic violence to make sure that they are not subjected to that. In 92, the Surgeon General ranks abuse by husbands to be the leading cause of injuries to women ages 15 to 44. I thought that was an outstanding statistic as well. I just didn't know that, and it's just a crazy statistic to me. Also in 92, the American Medical Association released guidelines that doctors can screen women for signs of domestic violence. And in 96, in California, a bill was passed protecting children from the effects of domestic violence. So this would give the court authority to remove the battering parent from the household and prohibit visitation if it would jeopardize the safety of the child. And it also allowed the non-offending parent or caregiver to create a safety plan to protect the child. So I deal with this a lot at work. I work in child welfare. So safety plans, I didn't know actually dated back to 1996, but that was interesting for me to read because we still use safety plans today. So to sum up this timeline, there used to be laws that allowed men to beat their wives as a form of discipline. So domestic violence was not considered a crime or even something that was wrong. There were laws that allowed them to do it freely without punishment or anything or judgment. Animals also had rights and protection from cruelty before women and children did, which I knew the SPCA was created before child welfare systems because child welfare systems were kind of birthed from that. But I never really put two and two together that women also didn't have any of those resources until after the fact. Um, while some states progressed in getting legislature for domestic violence victims, other states and countries seemed to move backwards. So I also found that in 1975, a magistrate in Brazil fined a man $11.50 for hitting his wife, and he stated that a man may strike his wife's bottom, but not her face. So it's just kind of, there was a few weird laws like that that I found when looking at the history of domestic violence. And the field of social work now has tools that are used for screening purposes to determine if someone is a victim or if they have an increased risk of being a victim of domestic violence. Social workers are now also trained to assess the safety of children who reside in an environment with domestic violence, which is something I touched on. Again, working in that field, we can safety plan and do a whole bunch of things before, a child comes into the foster care system or anything like that. Services. So there are many, many, many services for domestic violence victims. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233, and you can call it or text it. There's also the website for the National Hotline has a lot of different resources, and you can search by state to see what is in your area. You can also search by special population, whether it's race, ethnicity, or disability. They had different options if you're deaf, I believe. So you can kind of change the search filters and look around, but there's a lot of resources. There's also support groups, both locally and nationally. Some of the national ones that I found, because they're online, are Hope Recovery, Fort Refuge, Love is Respect, and Male Survivor. So at the micro level, when you have a client kind of in the office and you're one-on-one with the client, I would assess for any urgent medical needs. If they were having, if they came in to see me and just so happened to have like a broken bone or something, obviously that's priority and you want to get them seen at the hospital. But victims of domestic violence do have multiple health problems as a result of their abusive partners, and they can be both physical and physiological. So some physical ones, like I said, broken bones, burns, women can have miscarriages. Physiological symptoms could be flares in lupus, depression, eating disorders, anxiety. So we want to address all of those urgent things first. After forming an understanding of the type of intimate partner violence my client has gone through, I would screen them for signs of PTSD and other trauma disorders. I just think a lot of victims of domestic violence have a lot of PTSD, a lot of trauma. So I would want to focus or use trauma-focused interventions with them. I would also make sure to use a strength-based approach for my treatments so that the client understands that they're safe and that they have a say in their treatment and their life. A lot of times domestic violence victims have low self-esteem and low self-worth, so I think a strength-based approach is a good option for them. At the meso level, you could start to refer a client to resources in the community, such as support groups, group therapy sessions, and this would allow the client to know that he or she is not alone. There are other people that have been through this, and they don't have to go through it alone. For victims of domestic violence that have children, I would also offer family sessions. So this would allow for the non-offending parent and their children to learn how to communicate with each other now that they're in a safe environment. It would also give the child a chance to express any concerns or feelings that they had if they witnessed the domestic violence. So as someone who personally witnessed domestic violence growing up, I feel that once my mom and I were on our own, we would have benefited from learning how to communicate with each other because it's just a completely different environment. So learning how to do things in a healthy way instead of a toxic or traumatic way is beneficial.